books today because I finally finished off this one, although going to this one, not much of a difference. So I'm still going to be miserable until I finish this one. I just don't like having to flip like that. I'd rather do this, but use what you have. Anyways, today's book is number 3 in my book review marathon. Although I guess the fact that I split into 2 and 2, it's not much of a marathon, but I did not have the wherewithal to do 4 starting at midnight. All that aside, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about anyway, so it doesn't really matter. What it does matter is that today's book is Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. Oh, guys, I'm just saying, so I have had such little success when it comes to enjoying the books that I read. And then I had, 3, because Part of Your World I did not enjoy at all. I was wasting my time. But I had 3 books in a row that I absolutely loved. And actually, that's not even true, because I had 2 or 3 before that. It's just I then had one book in between that I didn't care for. So I was going through books so fast, and that's why I had 4 reviews that had to be done. All of that to say, I just have such an issue remembering what these books were about. So I was like, what is Great Big Beautiful Life? Because Emily Henry, I was on the fence about. I think I've tried to read a book of hers before and didn't think much of it. Like, it was too not chick-litty, because I like chick-lit. It was just too traditionally indie author, self-published Wattpad romance. And for me, that's just, it's fantasy versus reality. And I like to have a little bit of both when it comes to my romance, because we all know how cynical I am. But when I started writing my notes, I was like, oh. So I really enjoyed A Great Big Beautiful Life, and I absolutely recommend it. We kind of have 2 parts to this book. Once I get a little into this and I hit kind of the first part, I'm just going to give you all of that backstory and then continue to move on with the present time. The present time, present tense, apparently I'm still not ready. I only got a couple hours sleep last night. And I have a really, really long day ahead of me today. And then tomorrow's gonna be a really early, really long day as well. So pray for me. Anywho, we have 3 main characters. We have a girl named Alice Scott, who is a writer for this magazine called The Scratch, which I didn't know which way The Scratch was gonna go in terms of credibility. Apparently it's a very credible paper to write for. We have her love interest, whose name is Hayden Anderson. He is also a writer. He's more of a biographer by trade, but he has recently won a Pulitzer-prize for a book that he wrote about this guy who was dying, who had dementia or something like that. Anyways, and then we have a woman named Margaret Ives. I really enjoyed her story. If anything, I wish I could have had more, like an entire book about her. She is the heiress to the Ives media fortune. She had been a media darling back in her heyday, in her youth. She had married this guy named Cosmo, who was kind of like an Elvis sort of rock and roll figure. He tragically dies, and then at some point she just disappears from the public eye. Alice had bonded with her father over Cosmo Sinclair, and she has felt like a disappointment. So her parents had her and her sister at an older age, and her father has recently died, but they were like serious. They were serious journalists. They were kind of like hippies, where we live off the land and we have a farm, we grow all of our own stuff, and like life needs to be taken seriously, and we need to do things that matter. She never has gotten along with her mom. She always felt more connected to her dad. But in any case, she's just had this fascination with Cosmo Sinclair, and therefore she's also had this fascination with Margaret. She got kind of like this cryptic message on social media, because she's gone through all of the like dark web, all the deep diving to try to figure out where Margaret has gone. She's not had any credible leads, And then she gets this cryptic message from somebody saying, like, they were responding to an article she wrote. And they're like, oh, I love your stuff, great job. Did you know that Margaret is in this teeny tiny little Georgia town? And she's like, well, I would love to write a biography on Margaret. One, because it would make my dad proud. Two, it would be something that my mom would approve of. After receiving this message and doing her homework, she has done her darndest to get in touch with Margaret and to get Margaret to agree to letting her write a biography on her. Eventually, she gets an email back and Margaret's like, yeah, come on over. So we open up with her approaching Margaret's house, and she lives in LA. She's actually from Georgia, so her mom is not too far away, but they don't have a good relationship. She does have an older sister named Audrey who, if anything failed for me, I mean, there were a couple of points that I thought were a little, they took time that we didn't need to give. And it was that Audrey was born with some kind of a heart condition. Alice has grown up just constantly worried about Audrey. So we get this entire novel, anytime anything happens, and Audrey, they are grown women. They are in their 30s. Audrey was fine by the time she reached high school, but I guess it's so ingrained in Alice to always, whenever something happens, to always jump to the conclusion that it's Audrey. She does this the entire book. And for me, I was like, your sister has been fine. Why is it that every time something happens, it has to be because Audrey's in trouble? And Audrey is halfway across the world working with the Peace Corps. Like, Audrey's fine. She pulls up to the house. She knocks on the door, and she's met by this short German woman, and she's like, are you Margaret? And she's like, no, I'm not Margaret, follow me. She brings her to Margaret. They have this chat, and Margaret's like, why do you want to do this? Why are you any different than anybody else? And Alice says, well, for one, I think you're amazing. For two, I want to let you tell your story. And Margaret's like, well, that's totally great. If my story isn't the real, like, isn't the true story, but this is the story that I want to tell. So they're talking about it, and she's like, well, I'll let you know because my next appointment is here. Door opens, and it is Hayden. And Alice is like, what is happening here? So it turns out that Margaret has both of them basically auditioning to write this book. The end result is that they are each going to spend a month with Margaret, interviewing, talking to her, kind of putting their pitch together, and at the end of the month, Margaret is going to choose which person she wants to write this book. So Alice, I quite enjoy Alice. She is such a ball of energy and light and lightheartedness. Sometimes I thought she was a little over the top, but on the whole, I like that she brought levity to situations. And then on the other hand, Hayden is everything but that. He is super serious, and he kind of doesn't want to give her the time of day. He knows what the scratch is, but he doesn't know who she is. But he definitely sees her as competition. And so they continue to encounter each other, and he basically brushes her off every single time because he thinks that she has ulterior motives. Eventually she's like, I'm just friendly. I don't care what you are doing. This is what I am doing. And why don't we just hang out? You're the only person I know. There's a very large cast of characters, so I'm going to throw them at you now, but then reiterate who they are later. Alice's interview with Margaret starts at the genesis of the family fortune, beginning with her great-great-grandfather, Lawrence. Lawrence then has a son named, maybe not great-grandfather. And then Lawrence has a son named Gerald. Gerald has a son named Frederick. Frederick has Margaret and her sister Laura. Those two could not be more different, which plays a huge part into Margaret's story. Within this town, so the town is called Little Crescent Island. In the town, the only person that really matters, aside from Margaret are Jody, and then this guy named Captain Cecil, who owns one of the local pubs. He and Alice connect early on because she goes to dinner there, and he's like, you need to try the Captain's Bowl, which is like almost like a Kool-Aid-ish kind of drink where they just throw everything in the kitchen sink in there and it's got a lot of sugar. After all of that happens, the next morning, Alice runs into Hayden at the local coffee shop and she notices that he gets a green tea. I think like the next day when she goes to get something for herself, she decides, let me get him his green tea and a croissant. That's when I feel like sometimes Alice goes overboard because she's met this guy twice. He doesn't seem to want to have anything to do with her, yet she's going to randomly buy him something to drink and eat. She puts it in front of his door and goes about her merry way because they are actually right next to each other at the hotel. When she comes back, she notices that the stuff is still there. So she's like, I wonder what's happening. Is he okay? And this is, again, when I feel like, why do we jump to this conclusion? Because he has not opened his door and accepted strange food items, she automatically jumps to Audrey, something's got to be wrong with him. So she starts banging on his door. He opens it, and it's apparent that he just got out of the shower, and he's bewildered. And she's like, why didn't you accept this stuff? And he's like, I'm not accepting random food items that somebody left at my door. We just have a lot of little instances like that where she's like, oh my gosh, there's got to be this huge problem. And she does feel silly, but I was just like, I don't know. I thought we could have had a better way to have them continue to encounter each other because they continue to randomly show up at the same restaurants, which I guess maybe isn't so random in a town that small. It did seem a little convenient that they continue to choose the same places to eat, except maybe they're thinking the same thing of, let me try a new place every day. That night, the fire alarm goes off. Everybody has to evacuate the hotel. She goes out in her pajamas, and because she's so friendly, she strikes up a conversation with a drunk man. This drunk man misconstrues her intentions. I think he'd noticed her earlier, and now he was like, okay, here's my opening, let me molest her. Like, molest, not physically, but just not take no for an answer. Hayden comes to her rescue, and then he offers to go to breakfast. The closest breakfast place is not that close. They end up there, they have some banter. She notices how serious he is. She notices some of his idiosyncrasies. They get to know each other. We learn that he's from Indiana and his dad is the mayor of a very small town in Indiana. And some of his mannerisms just come from the fact that he felt like he was always watched under a microscope and that he had to be perfect. Alice then has her first interview with Margaret, and one thing I really liked was we would always have a their version versus her version. Sometimes her version made me sad because I like this their version idea of how glitz and glamoury things are in the celebrity world, and then to actually see the nitty gritty behind life. Sometimes I just don't want that. I just want to hold on to the idea versus the reality. We start with Lawrence. Lawrence was from a very small town, a very poor family, but a very large family. He was very close to two of his siblings, Dickie and Nicolette, and Dickie ends up dying young. Lawrence is devastated, but what he notices is that his parents couldn't care less. And his conclusion is that they didn't even know Dickie. There were too many kids and life was too hard. They were too focused on just making it through life to get to know their kids. So he decides, I'm gonna make money. He befriends this guy named Thomas Dougherty, and they go off to, I forget what state, but they go off to try to pan for gold, because this is early, mid-1800s. For some reason, he gets this sixth sense that there is gold in this one town, but he lies to Thomas about it. Thomas leaves. Lawrence strikes gold and makes it rich, which then creates this lore between him and Thomas, because Thomas arrives so angry at the deception, which I guess I could see. On one hand, I'm like, why? It's not, even though Lawrence admits that he lied, how was Thomas to know that Lawrence had this sixth sense? For all intents and purposes, Lawrence could just say, well, I just took a chance. I mean, I know I said that I don't think there's anything here, but, you know, you left and I was bored, and so I took a chance and I was successful. There are some holes in that thought process for me, but in any case, his dissolved partnership with Thomas has a lasting impact on Lawrence until his dying day, where as he's dying, he is arguing with the ghost of Thomas. He also, to his dying day, is apologizing to Dickie for not being there when Dickie needed him. But as a young man, his intention is to bring Nicolette to him. And the name Nicolette ends up representing the one that you would give everything up for. So this is a very important part of the story. At some point, he does try to bring Nicolette to him. One, because he's been gone for some time. Two, she married into Thomas's family somehow, so she's siding with the dowries. There is mention made of the first hotel that Lawrence ever bought, and she calls it the Ebner Hotel. Later on, Alice notices a discrepancy. Actually, maybe she called it the Nicolette. Whatever it was, she called it something that wasn't its original name, and Alice thought that was kind of fishy. She was like, why would she get the name wrong? Because it was purchased under one name, it was changed, and then it was changed again. Also, with all of this stuff with Lawrence, he ends up purchasing newspapers, and this is where the media empire begins. He's also really bitter. Like, he is not a happy man. He's not a good father. At dinner that night, she runs into Hayden again, and he refuses to say anything about how his sessions with Margaret are going. But she divulges that she feels like Margaret might be lying to her in some respects, and this all goes back to the Ebner thing. I guess it's because I'm not a journalist, but when she was researching things, she noticed, because Margaret had called it the Ebner, and that's when she was researching, she was like, oh, but the Ebner wasn't called the Ebner until after it was purchased by the Ives family. So I don't know why this set off bells in her head, but it did. And she's able to get Hayden to admit that he feels like Margaret is being less than honest with him as well. This relationship for me moved kind of fast. Henry was definitely trying to slow things down, but with that, I felt like it was repetitive, and there's just too much focus on the fact that Hayden would not have sex with her. I thought we could really have built a different foundation there for me to enjoy them as a couple, rather than it be all about the physical. But they get to know each other at dinner, and she's like, oh, dude's not so bad. He walks her home and then kisses her. And this is when I thought that things were just moving a little fast, because before they had dinner, they kind of couldn't stand each other. He still doesn't trust her. So right now it's all about sheer animal magnetism. But they do start a very loose relationship. She has been seeing this guy named Theo, and Theo's not into her at all. He seems to just be using her for what she can give him. Like, he's not invested in her. Anything that they do, it's like he's wanting her to come to him. He can't give her the proper time. They've been doing whatever they've been doing for months, yet he won't even call her his girlfriend. So he's kind of a side note, and he ends up actually being in the area. We'll get into that later. But because nothing is really happening with Theo, she's like, I like this guy and I absolutely want to pursue something with him. I just thought it was strange. I thought it was really strange that these two who shared animosity, and especially on his part, where he seems to not care for her whatsoever, 2 days in, they're making out. Like I said, there's this huge hullabaloo about them sleeping together, and that night, when he kisses her, she's like, yes, absolutely, let's seal the deal. And he's like, no, I don't want to do this with somebody I'm competing with. Which, valid, but I felt like in some ways it was a really flimsy excuse. The next time that Alice goes to interview Margaret is an artist. And so actually Margaret has been living under an assumed name in this town. So nobody even knows that her work is hers. She's very much a hermit. She interacts with nobody. She's kind of a curmudgeon, according to the locals. But as Alice is making her way towards the workshop, she notices this mosaic on the floor, and she asks Margaret about it, and forgive me, it's called a unicursal. It's not a maze per se. There's only one way in, one way out, but it's intended for kind of meditation. There's a lot of symbolism going on here, but it's basically, you will get out. It's just going to take you a while, but you are on the right path. And while you're on this path, you have time to think about things. But in this interview, we are now talking about Gerald, who is Margaret's grandfather. As driven and ruthless as Lawrence is, Gerald is as well. But Gerald does not have the business sense that Lawrence had, and therefore he is a failure in Lawrence's eyes, whereas his sister Georgiana, or Gigi, is like the light of their father's life. Eventually, Lawrence gives Gerald a newspaper. What Gerald has that Lawrence doesn't have is fearlessness. So he turns this newspaper into the best newspaper there is. He poaches people from other well-known media sources, and they just become the newspaper, and he grows the empire from there. He takes them from just newspapers to other media sources like film, but he can never please his father. Nothing he does can please his father. At some point, Gigi marries somebody and goes, and she lives overseas. Gerald ends up marrying a woman named Rosalind, which, I don't know. I thought this point could have been made sooner and better. Apparently he was born Catholic, so keep that in mind. Rosalind's father is a New York senator, and what Gerald is trying to do, because he lives in San Francisco, what Gerald is trying to do is expand the media empire, and all of the newspapers that he has tried to open in New York have folded. So they, in a sense, are a business partnership. Eventually he does see the beauty in her, but she is a philanthropist, so she uses his money to do good. He uses her power and influence in order to continue to build this media empire. He has two children, Frederick, who is Margaret's father, and Francine. He is determined to be a better father than his father, but he can't manage it. What he does do, though, is instead of putting all this pressure on his kids, he lets them run amok, and they're really irresponsible, and all they do is spend daddy's money. When Lawrence dies, this kind of unleashes all of the anger and frustrations within Gerald. So he abandons his family, which is where he meets this budding actress named Nina. Nina is much younger than him, but she is the love of his life, and they carry on this affair. He makes her career, and then Nina gets sick, and she goes away for a couple of years. When she comes back, movies have changed, and she's missed her window. So now her career is kind of in the gutter, and he, while she had been off, because I believe she also married somebody while she was gone, he'd also tried to run for office and he could not get elected. And then he decided, well, you know what? If I can't live at the White House, I will build my own mansion. So he builds the House of Ives. He then invites Rosalind and his kids to come live with him. And his kids really have no other choice, because if they don't come, Daddy won't give them any more money. So they're all living here. And the thing about him being Catholic, like, this is the only time that this ever makes mention or has any impact on anything. Because Alice is like, oh, well, why doesn't he just divorce Rosalind? Margaret says, well, because he was raised Catholic and he would never do that to her. Because the big secret is Nina got pregnant. Instead of divorcing Rosalind and marrying Nina, he was like, well, even though everybody knew he was having an affair, a child out of wedlock was still beyond the pale. So what happens here is that everybody's living in the House of Ives, and Gigi reappears, with her brand new baby daughter, Ruth. Yeah, Ruth is not Gigi's. Ruth is Gerald's and Nina's, and her unofficial middle name was Nicolette, which goes back to the fact that Nicolette means, or comes to stand for, the one that you would give everything up for. So he gave up the love of his life so that Nicolette, or Ruth, or they call her LP, which they actually never call her LP, but it stands for Little Princess, because she is just everybody's darling. She is showered with love and attention and gifts. So she's a little princess, but she actually turns out to be a really upstanding woman. So I was like, why do we need to go into this whole little princess thing? Because you're building her up to be just as superficial as the rest of her family, when she is not. So Gigi shows up with Ruth. Ruth is part of the family. Gerald is the father he never managed to be for his first two children, who are grown adults by this point. Ruth has a tragic end in which she gets married, and when she and her husband are going to come to Margaret's birthday, the plane that they're flying crashes and they both die. So it's really tragic and super sad. Sorry, I got sidetracked, which is not unheard of for me. Now we are back with Alice doing whatever Alice is going to do, and she has been invited to Cecil's birthday party. Around this time is when Theo says, oh, I'm in the area, I would love to see you. And she's like, great, because he's actually coming to me. So they make plans for him to come to the birthday party, only for him to pull out. He's like, oh, things ran late, I just don't think I'm gonna make it. Essentially, you're not important enough. I'm putting myself before you. She goes, and she has told Hayden about this birthday party because they'd had a little run-in. I think she was under the impression that he already knew. She shows up, Theo does not, but Hayden does. And I think they'd had some kind of an argument, so he makes some kind of a comment, and she's like, why are you here? Oh, I think it was hearkening back to the fact that he didn't want to sleep with her, because he didn't want to sleep with competition, and she just has a really fragile ego. She's like, why are you here? Are you here to insult me some more? And he's like, I'm here because you invited me. Apparently he didn't think her date was real. But anywho, they have a little thing going on, and this is where because she had asked him how he found Margaret, because she jumped through hoops to find Margaret. He would not tell her. And so at this point is when he finally divulges, I didn't find Margaret. Margaret found me. Margaret invited me, which I thought was a nice little twist. One thing I'd forgotten to mention is that Alice does confront Margaret about the whole Ebner naming, and this is how she learns about Nicolette and how the name is really personal to the family. So as Alice is out and about in the town, she stops by a local gallery and she buys one of Margaret's little mosaics, and it is called Nicolette. And this is what propels her to buy it, because she understands what the name signifies. On their next session, we are now touching on Frederick. And let me tell you that Alice was a little shocked because she did say, let's start from the beginning, but she was a little shocked at how far back Margaret wanted to start the family story. But we have now made it to Frederick, and Frederick is a playboy. Frederick has no ambition. He has no direction. And so it's like every person in this Ives family has a fatal flaw. Lawrence's was his anger. Gerald was this fearlessness and this feeling of insufficiency. And then Frederick was his jealousy, because Frederick had the world at his feet, but what he wanted was whatever he couldn't buy. He was jealous of his sister. He was jealous of the fact that she was given this fledgling newspaper and was able to turn it into something super successful, whereas he was given a studio and he couldn't care less. And his dad knew, and his dad luxuriated in watching his son fail. One day, he's at work sleeping on a stack of scripts when this very angry woman barges into his office. Her name is Doris Bernhardt. She's not particularly attractive, but he's under the assumption that she's an actress. And so he's like, oh yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure like we could get you a part. And she goes, what are you talking about? I'm a director. So she's upset because his father has not only moved her to a new studio, but he's also paying her less. But there is something, they call her Bernie. There's something about Bernie that Frederick is drawn to. They spend a very long time courting, like a year. And it's not even like actual courting, but at this year mark, they're on a walk and he looks at her and he's like, oh, we should get married. So they get married. It is something of a volatile, well, no, it's not a volatile relationship yet, because Margaret has very happy memories from her childhood, but because of Frederick's insecurities and jealousies, their relationship ends up not working out and they divorce. He remarries a couple times. She remarries a guy named Roy, who she's with for 30 years, even though Frederick is the love of her life. But she remains part of the family. She and Roy are included in all kinds of family functions. Everybody loves Roy. He's a great stepdad. Around this time, when Alice shows up for a session, we learn that Jody is on vacation. And Jody is, we don't understand. We don't know what her relationship with Margaret is. All we know is there's a very familiar relationship there, but then all of a sudden, she's just out of the picture. What we do learn more about with Frederick is that once he and Bernie get together, he invests more time and energy into the film industry, and he actually becomes super successful. She becomes super successful. They have Margaret, who becomes like the media darling, and then they have Laura, who is the opposite of Margaret. She's very withdrawn, very shy. And Margaret does a lot to ensure that Laura is protected from the media. She likes to draw attention away from Laura so that Laura doesn't get embarrassed by anything. At one point, Cosmo comes to town. Margaret is ambivalent regarding him, but she knows that Laura likes him. So at this point in time, Laura has become very close with Gerald, but he's dying. And so they go to this Cosmo Sinclair concert, and that night Gerald actually dies. So there's this whole riot at the concert because he's very Elvis-like. If you're aware of the mania that would surround Elvis, then you can understand what's happening here. So they have disguised themselves. They've snuck out of the house. They have made it so that nobody knows they are at this concert. Well, when the mania breaks out, Laura gets hurt. Margaret, in an effort to defend and protect, she has a little scuffle with, I think, a photographer or something. But they are rescued by the driver because the driver, I think Laura had said something about where they were going. So he has come to get them, and this signifies to Laura that Gerald has died. Otherwise, there had been no reason. So in some respect, she blames Margaret for getting her out of the house. Therefore, she wasn't able to be there when Gerald died. She withdraws even more. She becomes even more insecure, and she starts to get drawn in by this guy named David Ryan Atwood. It's more of a cult thing, but she's very vulnerable, and so she lets him draw her in. Now, we've kind of moved past Gerald, and we're actually in Margaret's story. The next day, Cosmo has come to the house to kind of apologize for all the craziness. They go out, they sleep together, and of course she's like, oh, I don't do this. And he's like, I do. And she's like, well, actually I do too. But she's enamored with him. However, for some reason, and I don't really understand this rationale, but he tries to keep in contact with her. He calls her, he writes her letters. She never responds back to him. She writes back to him, but she never sends them. And then eventually they lose touch. My thought is that she actually got pregnant and she didn't want him to know. No, I was wrong. She just, 4 years pass. They are at a movie premiere of one of Bernie's movies. They lock eyes, and that's kind of the beginning of the end, where, there's just going to be no keeping them apart. They get married. They go on their honeymoon, but he's from Nashville. So they go on their honeymoon, but then they kind of settle in Nashville. When she comes home, she learns that Laura has left and that she has gone to New Mexico with David for like a mental health retreat. She requests that nobody contact her because if they contact her, it's just going to prolong her healing journey. Yeah, obviously that kind of goes sideways. And eventually, so Laura had been willed all of these journals. I think Lawrence and Gerald had written, or Gerald, one of the two forefathers had written all these journals. And, these journals could be pretty damning, but Laura is the only one in the family who's read these journals. Eventually, they get an extortion letter from her saying, well, if you don't give us money, I'm going to go public with these journals. The family puts their heads together and they decide, let's just give the money. We have the money, so let's just do it. Margaret meets with Laura. She's like, Laura, come home with me. Laura is like, oh, well, no, da-da-da-da. And Margaret goes, do you think he loves you more than I do? And FYI, Laura looks terrible. Emaciated, all that kind of stuff. So Margaret's really worried. Laura almost seems to be a little bit brainwashed, but she has enough of a moment of clarity to give Margaret time, place, and date. We don't know what this stands for, but what it was a shipment of illegal guns. So they're able, because of Laura's testimony, they are able to arrest and put Dr. David Atwood in prison. Of course, there's this whole thing about that, which is, their story versus her story, but the fact of the matter was Laura was really vulnerable and she was able to be manipulated, but she was the one who brought down Dr. David Atwood. Around this time, a storm is brewing. Alice did not have enough foresight to charge her electronics, so when the power goes out, nobody can reach her. Hayden shows up and he's like, we were worried about you. He stays the night. Nothing actually happens, but it's a step in another direction. They also agree to full disclosure once Margaret has made her decision. The next day or something, Alice runs into Cecil. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry you couldn't come to my party. And she's like, I was absolutely at your party. And this leads into a conversation about a picture that he had given Hayden, because Hayden didn't believe that Cecil used to have super long hair in the 70s. So she's like, what picture are you talking about? And he's like, oh, you should go ask Hayden. You should go see it or whatever. She goes to Hayden and he's like, you need to go to Cecil. Because I guess she wanted to respect, because she thought something was fishy, something was off about this whole thing. And so she didn't want to overstep her boundaries in regards to how this might connect to what Hayden was writing. Hayden, very cryptic, and he's like, no, you should go ask. You should go ask to see this picture. She does, and she's like, this guy looks super familiar. She tries to Google Cecil, but she doesn't find anything. However, when she's researching the trial, she sees like a profile of a man, and she's like, that's Cecil, because Laura had a doctor testify on her behalf as to her mental and physical health, and that doctor turned out to be Cecil. The thing with Cecil was that he had changed his last name, which is why Alice couldn't Google him. So now she's like, huh, what's going on here? Why is Laura's doctor in the same town as Margaret? So now she's beginning to wonder if Margaret's sick, and this is why Margaret finally consented to have this book written. Back in the sessions with Margaret, Margaret does tell Alice that after the trial, she and Cosmo took Laura back to their Nashville home to help her get better. She then goes with her doctor, aka Cecil, to Switzerland to really get away from everything. And then again around this same time period is when Cosmo dies, and he had died in a car accident. They had kind of talked about kids, but they realized we probably are not the best people to have kids because our lifestyle is just chaotic and we have no privacy. Although around this time, Cecil's career has stalled, and the difference between his fame and Margaret's fame is that she was born into it, she grew up with it, whereas his kind of just came on all of a sudden. He had a hard time with the idea that people didn't love him anymore, so he's having some problems accepting the fact that he doesn't have the same level of fame. He's the aging rock star. But she has abdominal pains, and she's like, oh my gosh, I think I'm pregnant. No, she wasn't pregnant. Turns out she has appendicitis. They get in the car, they're going to the hospital when all these paparazzi appear around them, and it's like a Princess Diana moment where as they are trying to escape all of these paparazzis in their cars, they run a light and they get T-boned by a truck. This is how Cosmo dies. Out of nowhere, Alice and Hayden finally sleep together. Like literally, where did this come from? The only thing I was happy about was we didn't have to hear about it anymore. Like finally, we can just put that to bed. Jody reappears. Alice asks about their relationship and as well as like where Cecil factors into all of this. Margaret is like, okay, if I'm going to talk about this, you absolutely 100% cannot talk to the guy. You cannot talk to Hayden. So it's kind of like a double NDA now. She is telling her that Laura had gone to Switzerland, fell in love with Cecil. They then have a daughter, Jody. Cosmo is dead. Margaret has tried to disappear from the public eye and she can't manage it. And it's really interesting, like the public perception about all of her antics were just her desire to disappear. So it's because she can't disappear, because people follow her wherever she goes, she locks herself away. By the time that she resurfaces, she's old enough that nobody recognizes her, but it's about this time that Jody has shown up at her doorstep and she's like, who is this person? Go away. Jody's like, I'm your niece. Your sister is sick. She tells her that Laura and Cecil are in Little Crescent Island, Georgia, and that she should go and she should see her sister. Margaret just can't. She feels so guilty about anything that may have happened with Laura, and she's still just so sad about Cosmo that she doesn't go. But eventually she's like, okay, let me test the waters. Let me see if I can go out in public, which she can. That is when she decides to go and spend time with Laura. They spend 6 months together, which Margaret regrets not coming earlier. And Margaret's just like, I'm just gonna stay here. This is why she and Cecil are in the same town. This is how Jody factors into everything. And we are now closing out this month-long trial period. Both Hayden and Alice are prepping for things and they are getting ready to pitch. And Alice looks at Hayden and she says, why don't we just see if we can write this book together? And he's like, well, I already suggested that, and she shot it down. This is really where things come into play. This is your biggest spoiler. Hayden stays the night. He notices the mosaic and he comments, wow, that's a really interesting way to spell Nicolette, which this is something you will never see if you are listening to the book. And she's like, well, what do you mean? And he goes, I mean, that's the way my mom spells her name. So it's Nicollet. Alice puts the pieces together and she's like, Nicolette. It has significance. It has a very unique spelling. I'll be back. She goes to Margaret and she goes, you need to tell me the truth. What Margaret divulges is that she had been pregnant. She did not have appendicitis. She had been pregnant and they knew that it just wasn't a good idea. So then Cosmo dies trying to get her to the hospital because she was having legitimate pains. So she's feeling the guilt of that. She sends everybody away. She fires her staff. She sends her mom back home. She and Cecil keep in touch because he is going to be her doctor. He helps deliver this baby, and then this baby is put up for adoption. They named the baby Nicolette. That was the one thing that they were like, we want her to keep this name. And then Nicolette is adopted and she is Hayden's mother. The reason that Margaret reached out to Hayden was because Alice had reached out to her. So she comes up with this cockamamie scheme to have two writers compete to write her biography, when in the end, there was not going to be a book. However, as she went through this whole thing with Alice, it actually changed her mind about writing the book. But Alice is like, I'm not writing this book. You have got to tell Hayden. Hayden has already pulled out. He never told Alice that he had pulled out from the running. And what makes Margaret sad is that she gave up Nicolette so that Nicolette would not have to suffer being under scrutiny in the public eye, only for her then to marry a mayor and be in the public eye anyways. She is adamant that she has made the right decision. She is adamant that we not tell Hayden. And so Alice is like, I think you're wrong. I am not going to write this book. You need to talk to Hayden. She goes back, she argues with Hayden because she tells him that she has also pulled out of writing this book, but she can't tell him why. So they separate, and she and Hayden had a little bit of an argument at some point because she has a really bad relationship with her mom. She takes him to go meet her mother, which, I don't know, whatever. He says something to her about how she needs to be honest with her mother about how she feels, about how her mother makes her feel, and she's like, keep your nose out of my business. But now she goes back to her mom and she's like, I need some time. So she and her mother start to reconnect. She is honest with her mother about how she feels like her mother doesn't approve of what she does and how she can never live up to her mother's standards. Her mother, meanwhile, is like, I kind of feel the same way, where I'm not the best parent. I'm not the parent that you want. They start working through their issues, and she starts interviewing her mother about her father so that she can write a book about her dad. She has decided not to go back to Los Angeles. And one day, there's a knock on the door, and it is Hayden. And Hayden's like, Margaret told me the truth. She also showed me this letter you wrote. Do you really love me? So they have patched things up. We fast forward about 18 months, and she's just had a baby. They wrote that book together. It is an absolute bestseller, and she is now starting the book about her dad. That is how all of that ends. It was a really good book, but I felt like the ending was a bit rushed. And I felt like many aspects of their romance were unnecessary. Instead of focusing on them as a couple, it was more of a focus on their physical relationship. And I thought that took away from the message of this book, because this book was about a family that had all of these issues and had to work through these issues and they had all of these secrets. It's just a really off-putting juxtaposition, in my opinion, to go from something that has a lot of meat and heart to this really superficial relationship. But I liked the twists and turns. I had guessed something was going on with Jody. As I said, I guessed early on that Margaret got pregnant. I was just wrong about timing, but apparently I was right about what happened. But I was so sad because she and Cosmo only had a couple years together, and they were this golden couple, and they seemed to have this eternal love. But then it seems like they didn't actually have that. I mean, they did have that relationship, but by their story versus her story, you see the nitty-gritty behind the problems that they faced in their relationship. And I was just like, they didn't have enough time together. I wish they hadn't had any nitty-gritty. Thank you for joining me, and have a great day. Bye.